Ciao a tutti! Per questo terzo video della rassegna DEDA paesaggi hanno contribuito l'attrice Amy Turningbrook e la drammaturga Joan Holden, che ci hanno parlato con entusiasmo in una breve intervista della MIME Troupe di San Francisco, alla quale entrambi hanno partecipato. Questo progetto portò dall'inizio degli anni 60 il teatro nei parchi della città di San Francisco. Interessante quando John ci racconta che il fondatore di questa compagnia fu ispirato da un'altra compagnia a sua volta, italiana, con la quale entrò in contatto pochi anni prima. Buona visione.
June 26th in 2021, and we are at Joan Holden's apartment on Van Ness, and it's a beautiful morning.
It is a beautiful morning.
We've got our yogurt and blackberries, but today we're going to talk about the San Francisco MIME Troupe.
Free show at 2 o'clock, Washington Square Park, free show 2 o'clock.
Joan has been the resident playwright since 1960.
From 1967 to 2000.
Okay. You've got a huge list of plays.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes on and on forever.
Yeah, I wrote a play a year for 30 years.
Wow. Wow.
I had the best job in the world for a writer. And I think what we had done was reinvent what was the normal relationship between writer and company. You know that Molière and Shakespeare wrote for their companies. They both started as actors, but they were part of a company. They wrote for a company. You write for the actors that you have, so you know what they can do. And you imagine things in there. You imagine a character played by such, you know who's going to play that character.
Oh.
And you hear that person's voice.
What was it you said in an interview? You said the biggest criticism you hear about the MIME Troupe is that you're preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
But I think you framed it more as a revival. It's like a revival.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
That's my answer to that, because the company has been the theater of the progressive movement in the United States for a long time, starting in the 60s. And so the criticism is always, you're preaching to the choir, you're preaching to the converted. And my answer to that is yes, but that's part of the work of the evangelist, that you do revivals. So there's a certain revival meeting atmosphere to the MIME Troupe's performance in the park. But I'd like to hear from you, from the outside view, what you, about your first encounter with the group and what it meant.
Okay. I saw the MIME Troupe perform in Sacramento for free at the 24th Street Theater. I also saw you guys perform years before that in Nevada City. Just two very different performances, and what I loved about them is they gave me an opportunity to work off some parking tickets when I first moved here in San Francisco. So that's how I got involved as a volunteer. It seemed to me that it was wonderful how the MIME Troupe used humor as the net for the message, you know?
If there were no money, there'd be no rich. If there is no rich, there'll be no poor. No poor, there'll be no debt. No debt, no installment buying. No color TV, no washing machines. If there were no money, there'd be no church. No church, there'd be no God. If there was no God, there'd be no godless enemy. No godless enemy, no war. No war, no war economy. What the hell would we do with ourselves? Spend some money. Money we should spend. Hey!
But you're crazy, you're throwing money away!
No. I'm giving away money.
No, stop! You shouldn't do that, you fool!
The medium is the message. I mean, humor is the language of certainly me as a writer, and the people, the actors that want to join this company, which you didn't explain, performs outdoors in the parks.
Thank you.
The basic style, the basic venue for the company is the public parks of San Francisco, of the region. And so free shows, you know, you don't sell tickets, but you pass the hat afterwards. The inspiration for that was Italian, actually. Was the company was founded in 1959, before the 60s, by Ronnie Davis, who was a dancer and mime, and thus the name that doesn't stick, that is confusing to people because the company doesn't do pantomime.
So it's not like this.
Doesn't do, you know, invisible wall, invisible windows, right?
Okay.
But the style is very physical, and it was inspired by early in his career, but I think I have to go back.
Okay.
They're much more, a dancer or a choreographer builds a company around his or her work, collects a company, teaches a style, and that's what Ronnie did. The company, you need a company to do, an ensemble to do a particular style, the style of a particular artist. So the company, I think originally his idea was to have a dance company, a mime company, to do what were very, at the time, very avant-garde kind of performance art, collaborating with, but always based on a physical style.
And that became kind of your vocabulary, wasn't it? Italian?
Well, except for the intervention, he happened to see the Piccolo Teatro di Milano was on tour in the United States. Nobody knew about Commedia dell'arte here.
Oh.
And he fell in love with the style,
Okay.
with the form. And that became the idea of the company. It would be a small theatrical company doing shows in this style. And originally, you know, that is the basis of Commedia dell'arte, is a collection of typical archetype characters. You know, the merchant, the doctor, the lovers, and each has an own way of moving. They're masked.
Okay, the mask work.
They're masked. The women aren't masked, but the men are all typical characters who come down from Roman comedy. He would hire a writer to cobble together, to stick together bits of plays from Moliere or Goldoni of classic comedies.
Okay.
And the point wasn't the argument, the point wasn't the story, the point was the characters and the way they move and they act. Each character, it's id-based. Everybody has a ruling passion, ruling desire.
Actors would play multiple characters?
No, actors wouldn't play multiple characters.
But that's happening
Yeah.
now because of budget cuts.
Well, you
Maybe
can't
not.
do, That's part of the story, the evolution of the company starting from this Commedia dell'arte route
Okay.
and performing in the parks, which was immediately successful because
Free.
immediately drew a crowd because always with music, the costumes were Renaissance costumes, so you can't miss it. You know, it doesn't look like realism. You know you're seeing a show. So in the 60s, he had, and part of this story is that Ronnie had a small family income. And I think this is very typical of people who start companies, dancers or theater directors. To get a group, especially performance groups, it takes money. You have to be able to rent a space. You have to have time. So that's an important part of the story.
Well, right now, the MIME Troupe owns its building.
Owns it, yes, paid for by a tour, but also from family money.
That's
But
wonderful.
for theater companies throughout the United States, where we don't have a Ministry of Culture, where subsidies very hard to come by and rare. Most cities, San Francisco's lucky. San Francisco puts a tax on hotel bills and funds the arts out of that. But it's not the kind of subsidy that is common throughout Europe.
No.
You have to rent space, which is very expensive in cities like San Francisco or never mind New York. And that's always the agony for any kind of performing group. Where's the space? How do you afford the space? He could afford the space. He could rent an old abandoned church and for a rehearsal space and performance space. What happened was that this company developed a style which was based partly on Commedia dell'arte and partly on an American national theatrical form, which is melodrama. It eventually, this is also very typical, that the conflicts arose, artistic conflicts, and the company felt that we were the company. And it could no longer be Ronnie's company, it would be the company.
The collective?
The company became a collective.
Okay.
And he left.
Oh.
And we had a method for a long time, which was the company consisted of actors, a writer, a director, musicians, songwriters, because music is a very important element in any kind of popular theater. So the idea, I eventually figured out that we had reinvented the basic forms of popular theater when I began to work in Asia and saw and think about Chinese opera and kabuki and South Asian theater, which are all performed, all big styles with stock characters, and music is always a part, and drama and comedy aren't strictly divided the way they are in the Western tradition. And to me, the opposite of comic is straight ahead, realistic, naturalistic. So the company became a democracy, and everybody, and the idea was never that we would abolish all distinction of roles. I'm no actor, and not all actors can write, and not everybody can write music. So we always preserve those roles, but every show, every year would begin with a meeting, with a group meeting around a round table. Very important, the shape of the table, that would be round, and there's no head.
Okay.
And brainstorm, what's in the air this year? Is this the year Reagan is going to consolidate the triumph of the right, then how do we address that? We would, sniffing the air, what do we want to talk about? That came out of the group. And then it would be my job as a writer, or the writer's job. A role I evolved into because Ronnie hired me in 1967 to adapt a play by Goldoni to be a satire against the war in Vietnam, against the American war in Vietnam.
Ringraziamo Amy e Joan della MIME Troupe di San Francisco per il loro preziosissimo intervento e ci vediamo in un prossimo video di DEDA Paesaggi.